Yes, the recording is started.
Thank you. So, good evening. I am Kadri from Estonian Fund for Nature, and it's time for us to start with the webinar, Oiled Wildlife Response, Methods and Opportunities. The webinar will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube. I would like to remind you to keep your microphones on mute in order to not disturb the speakers. If you have any questions during the presentations, you can post it in the chat box. And at the end of each presentation, we will have 5 minutes to go through the questions. And additionally, we will have an open discussion at the end of the webinar where we can go through any unanswered questions. If you prefer to ask your questions via microphone instead of the chat box, we would kindly ask you to raise your hand first to avoid people speaking at the same time. If you hover with your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you can see the button Reactions, and under it is the Raise Hand function. We will have 3 minutes. We will have 3 presentations today. For some reason, I can't show you the program. I will just try to stop sharing and share again. So we will have 3 presentations today. And first up is Sascha Regmann from ProBird, who will talk about case studies and response options. So I will just open up Sascha's slides and wait for a minute. Sascha's slides are over here. And full screen. Okay, Sascha, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kadri. So then let's start with the first sentence. Next slide, please. You will hear this sentence very often, so I have a lot of slides prepared for this presentation. So, hi all, my name is Sascha, as Kadri has kindly mentioned, and I'm working for a German organization that is called ProBird. I'm very pleased that so many people are joining this webinar today. Thank you for that. In my presentation, I will introduce you to our organization, and then we will see some case studies of oiled wildlife responses. And last but not least, we will speak about different response options. So next slide, please.
I'm sorry, my computer is a little bit stuck.
Okay.
I will try to, yes, did it turn? Yes.
Okay, so yeah, ProBird is a registered NGO and we are a kind of umbrella organization. So all in all, we are 8 organizations so far, but we are still open for further interested groups and initiatives. We see us as a reliable partner for authorities, for the industry and media. And we also offer consultancy services, and 24/7 service is also available if it's requested and of course if it's paid then. Next slide, please. So we are partners in 2 international projects. One is the Global Oiled Wildlife Response Project. These are rehab people and university from different countries worldwide that are working together. This project is financed by the industry. And the second project is a European one. It is called Eurova. And you will learn more about it in Vanessa's presentation later on. Next slide, please. So here you can see a list of the oil spills we have been involved in the past 20+ years. In the first years of our existence, almost every single year we have had a spill, including those major spills like the Erika spill, the Prestige spill, or the Treasure oil spill in South Africa. Next slide, please. For the upcoming case studies, I collected 4 different spills to show you where we started and to tell you about the progress we made. We will start with the Pala spill in 1998, then we will have the Prestige spill in 2002, then the Full City in 2009, And finally, we will end up with the 2018 Oil Spill. But before the case studies, here are some more background informations. Please, next slide. Yeah, the history of oiled wildlife response is about 50 plus minus 5 years young. Earlier, there have been some single efforts to treat oiled wildlife, but not that successful. And since about 50 years, organizations started to work on a professional base with this issue. Right in the corner, you can see a newspaper article that was written before the Second World War. And in that report, the reporter said there is a sad fact that ships are the reason why so many seabirds are getting in contact with oil in harbors and also in open sea. At that time before the Second World War, most ships have not had oil water separators. Therefore, a lot of uncleaned bilge water was spilled into the sea. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the only graph in my presentation, I promise. I will show you later on just pictures, but we have to show this graph. And this is a good thing because it shows that oil spills from tankers are rapidly decreasing. But still other sources of pollution are there. So pipeline spills or oil drilling. So maybe you remember the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010, for example. This was a big issue. There are also more and more freighters on the oceans that could maybe bring up oil issues. And also plant oil spills have happened in the past years more frequently. Also here in freshwater areas, we have dealt with 3 or 4 oil spills that based on plant oil, which is the same effect for the animals because they are getting wet, but it's better for the people who are rehabilitating the birds because it's not a toxic oil, it's plant oil. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with our first case study. So the Pallas was a 147-meter long freighter, and it was carrying 2,500 tons of wood when it starts burning in the cargo space. This all happened in the end of October in 1998, and then the ship ran aground in German waters. Estimated 250 tons of heavy fuel oil as well as diesel was spilled into the North Sea. And there are different numbers about the birds that have been affected. So, but I think the middle thing, so let's speak about 15,000 birds of more than 30 species died due to this oil. More than 1,000 oil-affected birds have been found alive, and the ship is still placed on the sandbank, and they filled up the cargo room with concrete and stuff like this to avoid that the oil that is still on board will leak in the future. But there have been some oil leaks in the past years, and nobody knows exactly if it's still the Pallas that is leaking or if other ships has lost oil. Next slide, please. Okay, so keep in mind that 1998 was not 2021. So at that time, the internet provided just few information if you compare it with nowadays. So we have had no smartphones, no Facebook, no WhatsApp. Just the first generation of mobile phones have been available for rich people. I remember we had a colleague gave us his big fat mobile phone, those heavy ones, maybe you remember, with this big fat antenna. And I think we paid about 1,000 Deutschmark at that time just for the bill. It was incredible. So at our days, it's hard to believe, and maybe there are some people in the audience that are just 20 years or in this age, and they cannot remember this crazy times. And therefore, I took a photo of the 2 big paper things that are still in my office because everything has to be printed out, and yeah, it was not easy to share photos or stuff like this. This was not a digital spill, but a manual spill. Next slide, please. Yeah, the Pallas incident was a big shock for all the people that were interested in wildlife here in Germany. So we have had no experiences and no vision how to treat oil affected birds. We tried to find people with those experiences and asked for their advice. Some people came to help. There have been, for example, people from the Netherlands, from France, and later also American people came. The biggest problem for us was that the German authorities decided to kill the animals, but the public don't wanted it. So it's almost everywhere the same, so that some countries like Denmark saying, old wildlife response, we don't do that, we will kill the birds. But in some cases, the people or the public will help. And if you see those pictures in the news, the people must do something. And therefore, in the end, with the Pallas, both ways happened. So the hunters killed the animals, and we had also the chance to try a rehabilitation. Next slide, please. So on the photo, you see a thumb down sign. Why is that? So normally we refuse to show pictures that are showing wrong treatments or stuff like that, because pictures often keep in the mind of the people, and it is danger that those mistakes you have seen on pictures that you will repeat them. And therefore, every photo in my presentation with the thumb down, keep in mind this is not a good example, and I will tell you why. On this picture, for example, you see those people catching a bird at night, and this was during the Pallas spill. It was that we have been out late at night. It was the best chance when the high tide was. Every night we had a delay of 30 minutes to use the high tide, and then with strong lights we catched the birds. But on this picture you see those people having no personal protective equipment, so no gloves. And if you touch a bird that is heavily oiled with a substance like heavy fuel oil, it's also dangerous for you. And therefore, this picture is not a good example. Those people tried to give the best, but they don't have any personal protective equipment. Next slide, please. The next situation was that we needed to find a way how to house the animals. Without any experiences, we have put the oiled birds on straw and hay. That was not a good choice, as straw and hay brings up aspergillosis, which is a fungal disease. You will have as well a lot of hygiene issues, and also it is destroying the feather structure in the end. So also those both pictures are not good example. You see all those animals and they are very close to each other, and this is not a good way to hold them for a long time. Next slide, please. This was our second try. We tried it with wood shavings. It is a better approach if those shavings are dustless, but it's still not a very good holding. So you can also see that there is a food bowl that we delivered food to the birds. This is also not a good idea, as the food will be contaminated and the birds could get wet if they sit inside. But the solution is normally easy. You just have to put a stone in the middle of the bowl to avoid that the birds can sit in. So next slide, please. Okay, yeah. Another two pictures that are absolutely thumbed down. So that have been our first washing and rinsing attempts without any knowledge. Please count all the arms on the left picture. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 arms. So that means that 3 people are trying to wash this poor little duck. This is an eider duck, and it weighs normally around 2 kilograms. And you can imagine then there's also a photographer in front of the duck. So 4 people are treating this animal, and this must be hell of stress for this bird. And stress level is of high importance for an old wildlife response. So we found out that we have to reduce stress as much as it is possible. On the right side, you see also a bird in the rinsing process. This is also not a good example. You see the shower head. It's a normal shower head for people. With this kind of shower heads, you don't have enough pressure for rinsing the feathers perfect. And also the surface is slippery, so the bird can easily jump off the table. So this is also not a good option, what we see there. Next slide, please. Of the around 1,200 birds that have been collected, oiled and alive, around 10% have been released back to the wild. But even those releases are not comparable with the release criteria we have nowadays. There have been no blood testings before release, no vet check, no check for waterproofness, all those things that are normal standard now. And in our international protocols, we haven't done that 20 years ago. So all in all, it was a very frustrating campaign. Next slide, please. Okay, let's come to case study 2. In November 2002, the Prestige spilled circa 65,000 tons of heavy fuel oil into the Atlantic when it sunk off the northwest coast of Spain. Thousands of seabirds died, as well as dolphins, turtles, and so on. The coastline was affected in a length of far more than 2,000 kilometers. So this is comparable to the Pallas. There have been around 100 kilometers from north to south, and here we have more than 2,000, or some people saying it's close to 3,000 kilometer coastline that was affected with the oil. Next slide, please. So another pictures with thumbs down. So, and you also see that those people who are working in the oil and they try to clean the stones there, they don't have proper PPE. So that means they just have normal mouth masks and not really good protection clothing. And I remember during the Prestige spill and also during the Erika spill that happened 2 years earlier, a lot of volunteers got health issues because they had this fume the whole day of the oil. And I think nowadays you will not see those pictures in Central Europe anymore. Next slide, please. Also very sad pictures, I know. Yeah, to remove those oiled carcasses from the beach is also an important task. If you leave those dead animals on the beach, maybe scavengers like foxes, ravens, or gulls will eat from the carcasses and they will spread the oil and might oil themselves. So also another important task is that you can support the scientists with data on the different affected species and their numbers you found on the beach. So this is also for people who are collecting the animals, not just collecting the live oiled animals, but also the dead ones. Next slide, please. During the Prestige spill, our organization have had 2 small first aid rooms. One was in a small city called Noia, and the other one was in Vimianzo. Our task was to stabilize the animals for a few days before they were brought to a fully rehab center. And so you see there is a sum not down but not high, so it's medium. So there are still some mistakes on the pictures. You see the people are already wearing PPE, so they have their suits and also they have gloves, but those gloves on the pictures are not nitrile gloves. And nowadays we also just use nitrile gloves because this is really protecting you from the oil, and those normal medical thin plastic gloves are not protecting you from the chemicals inside the oil, and the toxic chemicals will come through the plastic. Next slide, please. This picture is showing my colleague Janine. Janine is a veterinary, and she was training local volunteers in Spain during the Prestige spill. So the Pallas spill in 1998 also was for Janine the first oil spill. And after that, as said, we have also served in the Erika oil spill, and we have had another oil spill in Germany in 2001. And therefore we got more and more experiences, and that shows the picture that Janine then was training the local volunteers in Spain how to handle animals and stuff like this. So it was the first step to get a bit more professional. Next slide, please. These are some pictures of the fully rehab facility in Pontevedra. This temporary facility was run by American experts that those people have much more experiences and also financial resources than we had at that time. And they had this big facility, which was a fully rehab center. So they have been able to hold the birds, to wash them, to do the pool management and stuff like this. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next case study is the Full City one. The Full City was a bulk carrier, and it ran aground in a bird sanctuary in South Norway in July 2009. About 200 to 300 tons of heavy fuel oil have been spilled, and the coastline was affected of about 120 kilometer length. Estimated 4,000 or 5,000 birds of different species died. Next slide, please. In a temporary rehab center, we got in about 200 old birds, of which around 50% have been successfully released. I think it was 96, 97 birds have been released. So it was much better, 50% compared with the Pallas. We said 10% have been released, and we don't know the quality if they survived for a long time after this wrong treatments. But here, so you can see a progress. So half of the animals have been successfully released. And if you also compare the pictures in the background, you see it is much more professional. So the perfect PPE. And now we also have those blue gloves, those nitrile gloves. And on the left photo, you see that the eyes of the bird are covered with a towel, which also reduces stress for the animal. And on the right photo, you see this is the day of release of this eider duck, and my colleague is checking the plumage if everything is dry and if the bird is in good shape. So it's much more professional than some years ago when we started. Next slide, please. Even here you see good examples. We have had perfect pools and the birds are looking good, so they are in good shape, they are relaxed. And I remember one story. This was when a guy came who was responsible for the hot water for the washing room, and he said that he produced too much hot water and he needs to pump it into the pools, if that is okay. And we said, okay, of course you can pump the hot water in the pool, and the ducks feel very good. So, and also that day we got fresh deep water shrimps, those heavy things, and I think the birds would stay there forever. So they have had warm water, the best food ever. It was a paradise. No, just kidding, but you see it's a progress. And also those paper stuff, my colleague Katarina is working there with the paper stuff, and that's what we also have not done during the Pallas. So we didn't have exact numbers. And now you have for every single bird an own sheet with the blood results and stuff like this, and with the weight, and yeah, so it's much more professional than before. Next slide, please. So also here you can see the technical issues. So it's a good work field for plumbers and electricians. Okay, also next slide. I think we have to hurry up a little bit. Yeah, and this is an overview about the rehab facility we had in this small harbor. So as said, 200 birds came in. We had this wash tent, we had 3 tents for holding area, and we have a tent for the veterinary and stuff like this. So, and this was also the first time that we had a kind of international or European response together. So, and this was also the starting point for our thoughts on the Eurova project. So I have worked with the Belgian colleagues together, and English people came over, and other countries have been involved. So this Full City Spill was the starting point for the European effort to share experiences and stuff like that. Next picture, please. Okay, last but not least, the Boju Whale. case study number 4. So in June 2018, the oil tanker or chemical tankers, it was able to load oil or chemicals on the tanker. Bo Jubel collided with a jetty in the Rotterdam petroleum haven. Around 200 tons of fuel oil leaked into the harbor, and the oil was also spread with the tides from the harbor to the North Sea. Next slide. A large number of mute swans have been affected by the oil. In the first 48 hours after the spill happened, more than 400 animals have been brought to wildlife centers in that area. Another 600 birds have been spotted, oiled, but still on the water. Next slide, please. Okay, what do you see? At first, I would like to say, I got a phone call on Sunday, the 24th of June. It was, I think, around 11 o'clock from my colleagues from Sea Alarm in Brussels. And they were asking if I could come over to Rotterdam to meet with another Belgian colleague and with Sea Alarm and with the Dutch authorities to assess the situation. Okay, 6 hours later, I arrived at the crisis center. I was driving like hell, 200 kilometers per hour with my big van. It was a big thing because it was Sunday and no trucks on the highway was good. So, and then on the same day, the decision was made to take care of the oil, but this is also not normal. So you have to speak with those people if that is wished or is it allowed to take care for the animals. But in that case, they said, okay, you can do that. The photo shows the place where we have been allowed to build up a temporary wildlife rehab center. As you see nothing. We just have had this parking place and we have to build everything from scratch. Next slide, please. So at first we have to check the measurements of the parking spot, and then we have to check the electricity, the water, stuff like this. And then we ordered 2 tents, one big tent and one smaller tent, and all in all, in the end, we have had more, about 1,200 square meters. The big tent was delivered on several trucks. It was hell of a work. So, and as said, we started Monday morning with organizing everything, and on Wednesday, that means 2 days later, in the evening, the facility was more or less functional. Next slide, please. Here you can see some impressions of the establishment of the facility. You see the washroom left, you see the storage room, and you see also the delivery of enough and proper food for the animals. And the tent with the birds, with the bird holding area is the one on the right side. And there you see the dimension of this big tent. Next slide, please. Okay, this photo shows an overview of the rehab center. Left of the tent, we have had a place for drying pens. So after washing, the birds have to be dried, and we brought it outside because it was summertime, good weather, so we don't need ventilation or stuff like that. So the birds were dried by the sun, and all in all, the complete rehabilitation took 4 weeks, and we got in 522 mute swans, of which 509 have been released successfully. This was a good example. Compare it, almost 100%. So it was 97%, I think, and Pallas was 10 or less %. Okay, next slide, please.
Sascha, we're running out of time.
Yeah, okay, I'm hurry up. So then we needed to find space for the pools and stuff like this. But let's go on with the next slide, please. Some more impressions of the amount of animals and big animals. So it was a heavy work. So swans around 8-9 kilograms and lift the animals the whole day. It was a hard work. But anyway, it was successful. Next, thank you. So dealing with volunteers every morning, having briefings, stuff like this, provide them with food and with drinks and plannings and afternoon sessions. But you have to do this. So planning is a big success factor. Next slide, please. Okay, good. Response options. So there are some different response options. This is a photo of a permanent wildlife center where all systems are functional. This is the best option. But also you have to keep in mind, this is a center in Belgium, in Ostend. They have a capacity of, I think, 150 animals. And if you will have a spill with 5,000 animals, you have to have plan B already there. You have to extend your thoughts. Next slide, please. Another response option could be a building of opportunity. This is a photo of a building in Estonia. It was an oil spill 2006, and that building was empty and available. It was a right location, so why not using? The only thing you have to do, you have to prepare it to build it from inside, and you need the permission to work there. Okay, next slide. Another option is a tent setup. So this is another tent setup. So you have seen the big setup in the Netherlands in 2018, but this is similar. The good thing is it is flexible. You can put it wherever you want to put it, and so you can be very close to the scene. Next slide, please. There are some other facilities. I just go through it very quickly. We have also beachhead collection points. That means if you catch the birds on the coastline, you have to stabilize them. You cannot bring them direct 2 hours with a car to a rehab center. And therefore, if you have collected an old bird, it's better to stabilize the bird as soon as possible. And therefore, a car or a small tent is enough for keeping the bird alive for a short time. So it's not for overnight staying. This happens, overnight staying and stuff like this. This happens in a forward holding center, and a forward holding center is like a complete wildlife rehab center, but without the possibility for washing. So you don't have a washing room and you don't have pools. This is happening. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's go on with this. Okay. We can read it together. International preparedness and response collaboration, as well as trainings and exercises, are the key to a successful old wildlife response. Next slide, please. So, establish international standards, share knowledge and expertises, educate next generation of rehab staff. Otherwise, next slide, that things will happen again and again. And you see again those photos with thumbs down. So you see photos with tourists that were handling an old bird, or left below the photo, some people are putting powder on top of old birds. And the result was that the birds have to be euthanized because they got blind. And also those washing photo in the middle, people with dirty clothing and with buckets on the bottom. This is not a good example. And therefore, share experiences, trainings, exercises, and we're done, I think. Next slide, please. You.
So thank you, Sascha, for this very interesting overview. I really liked that you had a picture from my hometown, Keila in Estonia. I was only 18 years old when the oil accident in Estonia happened, but I remember that there was a bird hospital in my hometown.
Oh, yeah.
And let's see if there are any questions from the audience. Kia has a question, but maybe Kia, you would like to ask it via microphone.
Yes, I can do that. It was just like you mentioned that it was like a success rate in the first case study that 10% survived, and then you have 50% or 89%. So is there like a general defined success criteria for like how many of the birds you help actually survive?
No. It could be that the next spill will just have a release quota of 40 or 50% instead of 90%. So it depends on the species, on the time of the year, how quick you can be there. So it's also the birds you got in the first few days after a spill, they are in a good body condition. And if you get in birds after 10 days out in the cold, for example, so they are weak and you will not have a good release quota.
Okay.
Okay, so Minna-Liina also has a question. How well do the birds get adjusted back to their normal life after a spill and the response operation, as the situation has been very stressful and also many of their companions have died?
Yeah, it's always stressful for the birds. So that is totally clear. And therefore I said that we try to reduce stress where it is possible. So when we treat an animal or handle an animal, we try to do several things at one time. So if you have a bird in your hand, so then you also can clean the box, for example, then you can provide food, then you can take blood sample or stuff like this. So don't handle the bird 10 times per day, reduce it to 2 times per day, and this reduces stress. And yeah, of course, it's also after release, it is maybe stressful for the animals, but there are already long-term survival studies and stuff like this, and birds with rings and ring recoveries. That is the proof for us that the birds will survive after they have been washed. So, and I remember we got a cormorant in, it was during the Erika oil spill in 1999. And this bird was already oiled in 1996 in an English spill. So after 3 years, we got a bird for the second time in an oil spill.
Thank you, Sascha.
Yep.
If we have any more questions, we can discuss them at the end of the webinar. So our next speaker is Agni Kaldma from Estonian Ministry of the Environment. And Agni will tell us about the tasks and expertise in the care of oiled animals. So Agni, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try to share my screen with you. And thank you, Sascha, for the presentation. I was a bit disappointed you didn't use Estonia as a case study here, but well, okay, you are excused for now. So, the tasks and expertise in the care of oiled animals. Well, when an oil spill happens, it is normally too late to start thinking about the strategy for dealing with them. So, oiled wildlife rehabilitation differs from the rehabilitation of other wildlife because the large numbers of birds which are contaminated all have to be treated at the same time and within a short period of time. And this places a lot of pressure not only on the people that take care of the birds, but also on the management level. And this oiled wildlife response can only be successful if all the steps of the rehabilitation process flow smoothly and without any delays. And this process can take on average between 10 and 30 days. So it's a pretty long period of time when a lot of people is needed on the spot. So these steps here on the screen are all these steps that are needed for the response event, starting from search and collection and ending with release, post-release monitoring, and the other stuff that is needed to be done afterwards, also necropsies and very careful documentation of all the process. And this photo here is one of the sketches of this process on the wall of one rehab center, which I think was in Keila. And also a lot of things are needed to make this process happen, starting from facilities, equipment, and human resources. Well, the key objective of wildlife response is to minimize animal suffering and to protect wild animal populations. And hundreds of thousands of animals, birds mainly, can become oiled in a large-scale oil spill. And if these best practices and guidelines are not followed, the situation can quickly become unmanageable. And also it needs well-trained wildlife rehabilitators. And as Sascha said, there have been before many mistakes made, not because of people wanted to hurt animals, but because they just didn't know how to handle, and people still don't know how to handle the situations. And this is a very sensitive issue, and it can, without a proper management, can lead to people just setting up their own rehabilitation centers or treating birds in their own homes, and this is the situation that can occur. But by organizing this well-managed oiled wildlife response operations, this kind of situations can be kept under control. So this in this presentation, I will be talking mainly about this human resources part, not going into facilities and equipment stuff so much. So staffing a facility, well, a facility cannot work properly if there is no expertise on the work floor, and this expertise by specialists in oiled wildlife rehabilitation is a quite unique skill, and it's not something very common that people just have, because it needs to be trained. And in many countries, there are organizations that are specialized in dealing with injured wildlife overall. And some of them have knowledge and experience of dealing with oiled birds as well. Some of them also have resources, and they keep registers of volunteers and trained volunteers. And these organizations are a valuable place that can provide expert advice, trained staff, volunteers to assist in oiled wildlife response. Volunteers can be an important resource for oiled wildlife response, and here we mainly, well, I will mainly talk about the volunteers in oiled wildlife response, not so much about the specialists and section heads and managers. So basic responders. They work in the facility is very labor intensive and also consists of a large variety of simple routines that can be learned quickly by persons who are interested. And the use of volunteers in a facility is an important resource. It often is the only way by which a facility can be made operational for a large number of oil-affected animals, because the number of specialists is always very limited. And the basic, after a short information or basic training, there are these routines that responders are capable of carrying out on the work floor, but they still have to be supervised by specialists. Well, for instance, in Estonia, these trained volunteers are coordinated by the Estonian Fund for Nature, in Finland by WWF Finland, and in Germany, ProBird takes the lead in that. There are a lot of organizations who can be asked for help in several countries. And the more simple tasks that can be carried out by basic responders are search and collection, transportation, reception, pre-wash care, and stabilization. These are just a few photos of these routines for transportation, for pre-wash care, for search and collection, and in the left upper corner, you can see a work that is mostly needed in the facility and which has to be done basically all days. And it is a very important work, which is, as you can see, cleaning the floors, the nests of the boxes of birds, everything needs to be cleaned all the time. Advanced responders. This is the step between being a basic responder and a specialist. And this can normally be taken by a course where the basic routines are turned into a competency skill that is required from the advanced responder level. And the advanced responder has a good understanding of the protocol and is able to carry out the routines prescribed by this protocol on the workflow relatively independently and without supervision. Having advanced responders on the work floor frees up the time for specialists to concentrate on the crucial parts of the rehabilitation process that needs a lot of attention in order to be successful. So as advanced responders can also be helpful in search and collection, in transportation, in intake, reception, in pre-wash care and sterilization, in washing, rinsing and drying of the oiled animals, in post-wash care, in pools, and also in release. But there are also a lot of other tasks that are needed in these facilities. As Sascha also showed you in his presentation, there is a lot of construction work that needs to be done and a lot of other work like electricity, waterworks, pools, a lot of stuff. A facility, especially a facility that deals with hundreds of animals, needs so much workforce, and not every person on the work floor doesn't need to be expert on wildlife rehabilitation. And these works that also are needed might not have nothing to do with animals, actually. These are like driving and shopping, coordinating volunteers, waste management. People working need housing, they need food every day. Everything needs to be documented. All the this facility needs to have these labels and signs everywhere, and these need to be updated daily. Also, health and safety is a very important issue that has to be taken care of, and equipment for that needs to be on the place, and people need to be instructed how to use the health and safety equipment and so on. So there is a lot of work also that has nothing to do directly with animals, but it's also a very important job. So what can we say in conclusion is that there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done for taking care of these wild animals, and yes, not all the work has something to do with animals. Also, as Sascha concluded, the thing is that training is needed, and then the protocols need to be followed so that the operation can be successful. And while this work in the rehabilitation facility is very stressful for birds and for people. There is an important thing that you don't forget to have fun in between also. So here I will finish and will ask if anybody has questions.
Thank you, Agni. So Heta has one question. Is an advanced responder also in a role of a group leader?
Well, I think that Vanessa will talk about this Eurova model and all this after and explains the roles there. I think, I'm not sure. If not, I can do that also. But the group leaders are mainly needed for volunteers to coordinate the volunteers on the work floor. The specialist level in here can be volunteer coordinator, and well, in this Eurova model that we have been following last years, there are basic responders, advanced responders, specialists, section heads, and managers. So the group leader is something that is not in this specific module. But yeah, I guess it's an advanced responder.
And there was also a question about who is usually covering the costs of treating wild animals, and also the tents and pools, electricity, and etc.
Well, the financing solutions are different country by country. Normally, the governmental authorities of the country are responsible for the overall financing, finding the financing if they don't have the financing, but also the international funds cover the costs of oil spill afterwards. So if the government will finance the work, then they can get these finances back from the funds after the event. And for that, I also talked about documentation. And this is the place where the documentation comes extremely important, because for the international oil funds, every single euro spent has to be documented.
Thank you. And also Pia has one question.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation, Agni. I was wondering, like, you have all the specialized volunteers and then we can call them normal volunteers. How do you get all these? Because as I can understand, you need a lot of volunteers. So are they already part of ELF, or would it be just people walking in from the street, citizens saying, oh, I have the day off, can I do anything?
Yeah, well, volunteers can be volunteers that are already signed up to some organization that is dealing with wildlife, or some other organization that are like voluntary rescue service or whatever, Red Cross, who also has volunteers. So there are several organizations who have volunteers already, and there are also just people who see that there is an incident and they want to come help. So basically people from the street who just want to help and turn out in the oil spill. So yeah, there are mainly two ways to get volunteers. The random volunteers who just come because they want to help, and the volunteers who are already registered under some kind of volunteer organization.
Thank you, Agni. Is there any more questions from the audience? It seems that there aren't any at the moment, but we can still go over some questions in the final discussion at the end of the webinar. I will just briefly share my screen so that you could see the program of today's webinar. So we are a little bit ahead of time. In this program, we have a break from 5 minutes after 7 until 7:15, but I think maybe we can meet again 5 minutes after 7. I think, Kia, can you please write it in the chat as well? So 19:05, we will meet after a break to listen to Vanessa Ryan's presentation about developing oiled wildlife response in Europe.
I will write it in the chat. So time for refilling the coffee, and we will be back soon.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 5 minutes past 7, and we can resume with our webinar. Our next speaker is Vanessa Ryan from WWF Finland, and Vanessa will talk about developing oiled wildlife response in Europe. So Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who is here. Apologies, I will have to start this presentation from the top. Let's see. It still wants to start from the very bottom, so excuse me, I will have to just scroll back. Yes. Okay, so great to see all of you here tonight, and it's been interesting to follow the discussion so far. My name is Vanessa Ryan. I work as Marine Conservation Officer for WWF in Finland. And as was previously mentioned already, WWF Finland coordinates a troop of volunteers for oil spill response, and as part of the tasks for the volunteers, oiled wildlife response tasks are also included. So we've been doing this work since 2003. And Sascha and Agni explained in their presentations, gave a good background on how animals are taken care of in oiled wildlife response, what the protocols are and how they have been developed over the years. And also Agni talked about the different tasks that volunteers can be given in an oiled wildlife response operation. But now I will talk a little bit more about what is going on a national and regional and European level, so to speak. On the higher level, the grassroots have been dealt with, and now we're talking about the large-scale developments that are needed in order to push the developments of oiled wildlife response into the right directions. So I will talk about developing oiled wildlife response in Europe. Well, the background was already there, given by Sascha through many examples of oil spills where oiled animals have been encountered. But the fact is that even though maritime safety has increased and gotten a lot better over the years, accidents we haven't still been able to eliminate accidents completely. So they will happen also in the future. Of course, they can be minimized, but the risk is ever present. And what we've seen in Finland, for example, is also that it mightn't necessarily be spills from shipping that cause accidents. Along our coast in Finland, we have had many smaller spills that have been land-based. So there are many different sources for oil spills, and they all need to be accounted for. Countries in Europe have a very varying degree of experience with large-scale oil spills and large-scale oiled wildlife response operations. So there are countries that have virtually no practical experience and countries that have been through the mill a couple of times. But there is really, on a European level, a very big difference also in preparedness for oiled wildlife response incidents. So there are big differences in preparedness. There's big difference in the different countries' capacity to respond, and also in the resources that they have available. So in certain countries, for example, volunteer resources have been utilized for a long time and the system is in place, but in other countries, things are still being developed. And here I lifted out one of the incidents that Sascha talked about, so the Rotterdam oil spill from 2018. You can see the headlines there. But what also has become evident from the previous presentations is that incidents, when they do happen, they require us to initiate a very swift response. So we need to know what we're doing and who is doing it and why they are doing it. And we also need to make sure that by doing it, we don't cause problems for the other parts of oil spill response, and we don't make the problem worse, so to speak. So the national spill response groups need to be quickly mobilized. We need to be able to start the work immediately when we hear about an oil spill, and we need to be able to evaluate the possible wildlife effects that are associated with the spill. And we also need to be prepared because, as I said before, countries are prepared to a varying degree. We also need to be prepared to involve international experts and expertise to assess with the management of the spill as a whole, and also to perform different expert tasks that we mightn't necessarily be able to perform ourselves. So in this, cooperation with national oil spill response authorities is absolutely key. We need to make decisions about resource allocations. We need to make decisions about where to place our facilities for oil wildlife response, and we need to be able to draw up our logistic chains and not mess with the other aspects of oil spill response. So the simultaneous work that will be ongoing out at sea to try and contain the oil, and also on the shore to try and clean up the mess. So the question is, how does it all fit together? And here on the right-hand side, on my little chart here, I know it's hard to look at charts this time of the evening, but here it is anyway. We have an example of how it is thought to work in Finland. So you can see on the top there, we have the overall leader of the spill. And when I talk about the spill response in this context, I talk about the whole deal. So that involves possible search and rescue operations, at-sea response with containing and collecting the oil, onshore activities with search and collection and scat, so kind of trying to get information about which parts of the shoreline is oiled and which aren't, and also the cleaning of the beaches. And in Finland, we have a few authorities involved. So the Finnish Border Guard, which is portrayed there in a kind of turquoise box, is the authority that is responsible for the operational oil spill response at sea. And then we have the orange box, the rescue services, which are responsible for the shoreline cleanup. And then we have the municipalities that come in with the kind of, once the acute phase of the spill response is finished, they are involved in the kind of secondary cleanup activities. So all the kind of oil spill response activities will be coordinated via the authority command center. And our voluntary work will be kind of subordinate to this. We will have a joint leader of the voluntary work who coordinates all the work that different voluntary organizations do. So this could be voluntary search and rescue, it could be voluntary resources that are used for healthcare, for helping the volunteers that work with the oil, and also, of course, the volunteers that are involved in shoreline cleanup and oil wildlife response. And then, of course, under the leader of voluntary work, we have different levels and different sections, like the volunteers that are focused on operative activities and the ones focused on supporting activities. And the question now being, since countries are not necessarily prepared to an extent that they would need to be and might need help if they are confronted with a large-scale oil wildlife response or incident, where does the international assistance come in? And this is also a question that we're dealing with in Finland at the moment, trying to figure out how all this fits together. Hence the question mark behind the international assistance. If you look at the preparedness on a national level, there are a few things that we need to figure out in order to be able to respond on a level that's needed. So first of all, of course, we need to be aware of the sources for possible and potential sources for oil pollution. So this would include, of course, shipping, the major shipping routes, harbors, and industry, and also like abandoned industrial sites that we have also experienced spills from. So locating and quantifying the risks that those sources pose is very important. Secondly, of course, you need to know where your sensitive areas are. In Finland, we have one big problem, and that is the length of our shoreline and the kind of complicated, complex archipelago that we have. The map that I've stolen from Google Maps is portraying the archipelago sea in Finland, where we have literally thousands of islands. So looking at this would be, of course, a logistical nightmare from our point of view. But we are aware of the problem, and we are doing our very best to prepare for the very worst. So taking into account all your logistical chains, how you will deal with the shoreline that you have been granted, and knowing where the important sensitive habitats lie for different species. They might be underwater or above water, and also thinking about the accessibility of these sites is very important. Then, of course, speaking about oiled wildlife response, we need to know where our bird populations are, how big they are, what species might be present at a certain time of the year, where the important breeding areas are, migration routes, and also, of course, know what your endangered species are and what the potential effects of an oil spill could be on these. Also, it's very important to start even on a small scale to build relationships with authorities, be they national authorities or regional authorities, and build a kind of national network of experts. So we're talking about people with knowledge about birds, ornithologists, people who are otherwise moving in nature, might have local knowledge about important bird nesting sites or migration routes, and vets and other experts that you might need for the response. And then, of course, if you have the possibility to start training volunteers and experts, at least to a very basic level. So a level where Agni was talking about the tasks that are involved for volunteers, and some of them don't require necessarily any pre-existing knowledge about, for example, the behavior of birds. It might be very labor-intensive work like building and cleaning and preparing food. So having enough local workforce that is trained to a basic level is very important. And then, of course, you need the trained experts who are capable of making the decisions that need to be made along the way, and who are capable of training volunteers for other tasks. And then, as a last point, keeping a stock of emergency equipment, just things at least that you need for the first few days. So material to build cages, food, materials so that you can stabilize the birds, keep them warm and healthy, or not healthy, but warm and safe until a permanent facility can be set up. So that is kind of what you can do on a national level. And now I'll talk a little bit more about the regional level. And here, of course, since we are in the Baltic, I will use the Baltic Sea as a case study and talk about what we're doing on a Baltic level in order to increase the awareness of the risk of oil spills and the need to prepare for oiled wildlife response, and also talk about kind of current developments that are happening. So as some of you might know, the Baltic Sea has a very long history of cooperation in oil spill response through the Helsinki Commission, Halcomb, which oversees the Baltic Sea protection that is done on a regional level. And mostly this work has been focused traditionally on at-sea response, and now in the last maybe 10 plus years, 10 to 15 years, this cooperation that has been ongoing has been kind of developed into to also incorporate shoreline response and oiled wildlife response. So we're still, from a historical point of view, taking the first baby steps, but 10 plus years isn't bad, and we're making progress. There's a growing realization among authorities on a Baltic level that there is a need to integrate oiled wildlife response into the overall response systems. And this is something we're facing on a daily basis when we try to figure out how things work on a national level, how the information flows between at-sea response, onshore response, and then the organizations who work with wildlife response. But it's kind of a good model area for development of a regional wildlife response system, because we have that rich history and tradition of cooperating, and the authorities know each other, and also the organizations working in the region know each other. Continuous ongoing work under the Helsinki Commission, under Halcomb, is through an expert working group on oiled wildlife response. Which has meetings a couple of times a year, and is tasked with a few tasks which are outlined here below. So facilitating the development of oiled wildlife response plans. This has been a long process where we are trying to establish oiled wildlife response plans in every Baltic Sea country. And this is a journey that a lot of countries are still on, trying to develop plans to make sure that they can actually respond when something happens. Another task is to exchange information and organize trainings and information sessions, for example, on the first response methods, on euthanasia, on kind of targeted topics that we feel are needed, where development is needed. And then also one of the tasks is to produce annual reports on wildlife activities in the different countries. And especially important is to involve NGOs and the private sector. So make sure that all the stakeholders that have an interest in the issue are invited. I was talking about the annual reports there on the previous slide, and this is kind of also information that is gathered on a regular basis, is through the Halcomb self-assessment tool that countries use to assess how well they are prepared for an oiled wildlife response operation. And here you can see just two examples. They all look quite similar. We have Finland on the left and Germany on the right. And you can basically see it as a kind of expanding. I hope you can see my mouse when I point, that this gray circle here is the level of where there are gaps to fill. The white center is where progress is to be initiated. And here the blue ring is on a good basis. So that's kind of a good aim to have. You want to have a preparedness that is on a good basis. And then the green ring here, world class. So you're really excelling at what you do. And the self-assessment tool deals with different parts of oiled wildlife response. So planning and integration, which is one corner. Exercises is another. So do you have, for example, regular exercises together with national authorities? Partnering and funding, is there a funding scheme available for volunteer organizations? Is it regular? Is it enough? Is there money to develop these things? Equipment and facilities, do you have what you need for those first days, or do you have a permanent facility? How have you thought of organizing yourself? And then last but not least, training. So how do you make sure that you have the expertise and the people you need in case of an event? And here you see that these two examples are both on quite a low level. Progress is being made. And of course, it's up to the countries themselves then to determine where they feel comfortable being. And of course, the ideal would be that we as a region would reach at least a good basis. So making sure that we actually know what to do together on a regional level if something happens, and that we can utilize the resources that the different countries have in an efficient way. What's happening right now in Halcomb is that the Halcomb Baltic Sea Action Plan is being updated. And for those who don't know that action plan very well, it's kind of a guiding document and strategic document for all the Baltic Sea countries that determines what measures need to be taken in order to protect the Baltic Sea. So the Baltic Sea Action Plan deals with everything from eutrophication to hazardous substances and protection of biodiversity. And in this update process, we have proposed 3 new measures to support oiled wildlife response, and you can see them here. So the first one is to develop a framework for holistic integrated management of marine pollution incidents. And that was what I was talking about before, the fact that different countries realize and response authorities realize that there needs to be a proper integration between the different sectors of oil spill response. So oiled wildlife response can't be seen to be kind of an independent little thing that's happening on the side. Another one is strengthening mutual assistance for oiled wildlife response in the Baltic region, which is also very important. So making sure that we can use resources from other countries and also European level resources. And the third one is to undertake monitoring and pollution risk assessments regarding species and habitats in the Baltic Sea region. And this last one refers to the kind of data that you need in order to know what you're planning for. And these data was kindly Nele Marcones from the Kiel University kindly allowed me to use this data for this presentation. So what we need to know is where are the most sensitive habitats and where are the most sensitive species for oil spills. And you can see here that there's just an example of, for example, the common eider, where you can see the kind of aggregations and population distribution and sizes of bird aggregations at certain times of the year. And what is really noteworthy is that we can really see that there is a need to prepare for thousands of birds in the worst case scenario if an incident happens in sensitive areas at certain times of the year when there's really dense aggregations of different seabirds. And here, we can maybe skip this. This is also a Halcomb charts of vulnerability of, it's not vulnerability, but status of different breeding and wintering bird populations in the Baltic Sea. So you can see just the percentages of endangered species. So preparedness on a European level, what does that mean? There's a lot of expertise that's scattered across different organizations in Europe, ProBird, for example, being one, ELF being another, of countries where there have been multiple spills in the worst case, but which has allowed the countries to kind of develop the expertise that's needed. And we need to ensure that that expertise isn't lost, that we have continuity, that the expertise is moving on to different organizations and also within organizations. And we need to make sure that we have adequate resources and compatibility of training programs and protocols. And I will talk a bit more about the compatibility of training programs and protocols shortly. So for this purpose, to make sure that we can actually work together as a team and utilize the resources we have as efficiently as possible, we have created a Eurova network, European Oiled Wildlife Assistance Network that was mentioned before. This has been a lengthy process, but basically got a lease of life from a EU-funded project which was carried out in 2015 and 2016. Eurova is what it says it is, a network of European oiled wildlife response experts and different organizations who have signed what is called the Eurova Charter. And if you're interested in reading the Eurova Charter, you can go and visit the Eurova website. If you I can maybe put it in the chat box later on, or maybe if Christoph, if you're there, you can put it in the chat box. I saw you there earlier among the participants. It currently consists of 8 organizations and a secretariat. The secretariat function is provided by Sea Alarm. And we're all working together to improve professionalism in the field of marine wildlife emergency response. So making sure that we're working to certain standards and that we are a reliable force to be reckoned with in the case of a spill. I said before that the Euroa network was kind of developed during the first Euroa project that was conducted a few years ago. And within this Euroa 1 project, we developed a module of qualified oil wildlife response experts and their equipment. So kind of drew up what a module would look like, what requirements there would be for experts to be able to join this module, and how the module would work in case of a spill. So we defined a standard operating procedure, basically the rules for how the Euroa network is mobilized, how we work, what sort of standards we adhere to. And we created training packages for different functions, the functions actually that Agni also referred to in her presentation. So advanced oil wildlife responder, response specialist, section head, specialist veterinarian, and wildlife response manager. And now, at the moment, we have a new project that has started in January and will continue for the next 2 years. And it's building on the previous Euroa project with a kind of vision to improve Europe's preparedness for oil wildlife emergencies, just like the first project also wanted to do. So the objectives of this Euroa 2 project, you can see them here: strengthening the network cooperation of the Euroa network, creating educational tools for governments and network members, enlarging the Euroa training portfolio, which we have developed in the previous project, and also to extend the Euroa standards and the Euroa operational profile to develop a sea turtle branch as well. Okay, the structure and outcomes, I will talk you through them briefly if you're interested, and if you want to know more about the Euroa project, you can always ask questions afterwards. So you can see here that the Euroa project structure, it's in different work packages. So the first work package being the traditional project management, which maybe isn't so exciting, but needs to be done. The second package of the Euroa 2 project is promotion. So we're producing a new website, sending out newsletters, and creating kind of social media profiles for the Euroa network and the Euroa project. Another package is training and exercise packages, so developing a risk and impact assessment course, manager's course, exercise development guidelines, wildlife tabletop exercise package, which can be used then for countries to develop their preparedness, and an e-learning module for network members. Whoops, sorry. And then we have the next package, which is Euroa network collaboration. So just making sure that we have regular network meetings and equipment inspections, and making sure that the network is working. Then we have another work package, which is authority consultation and workshops. So we really want to strengthen the relationship and bond between organizations that work with wildlife response and the authorities that they will work in collaboration with. So we're organizing national authority workshops and also desktop study and recommendations for oil wildlife planning, which can be very useful for countries that are trying to draw up their oil wildlife response plans, but mightn't necessarily have experience of doing so. And then last but not least, the training courses with which we are aiming to kind of raise the preparedness in the individual countries. So trying to make sure that different countries have the experts they need in risk and impact management. They have the management skills to deal with oil wildlife response, and they have specialists that are able to perform certain tasks. So for example, specialists for field work, or specialists for washing and drying birds, or specialists for pool management. And also organizing advanced responder courses and premiering the advanced sea turtle responder course. this is just kind of a timeline of how the events will be timed during the project. So we started now in January 21 and aiming for the first courses to be held by the end of the year, so after the summer. And here you can see just the timeline all the way up to 2022. That was it for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and apologies for the text on my last slide being partly in Finnish, but I hope that you have questions for me now. Thank you.
So thank you, Vanessa, for this thorough presentation. We do have some questions from the audience as well. Kia would like to know, is the Eurova 2 also looking at changing the minds of those countries who goes with kill instead of care response?
Yeah, changing minds is maybe not the right term, but definitely looking into the Eurova project itself is not looking into changing the minds. We have a limited scope, of course, in the project, but on a European level and on a regional level in the Baltic Sea and through Halcomb, we're definitely, of course, in dialogue with the countries. For example, Denmark, that have decided that euthanasia is the way to go, and for the most part, kind of going through what needs to be taken care of, because if you decide that you want to euthanize all the animals rather than care for them, you still have certain things that you need to be prepared for. So you need to know how to safely do it, how to make sure that you're not impacting the wildlife population unnecessarily much. And also, you know, you need to have the protocols in place, who can actually perform the euthanasia, etc., etc. And more, I think we're seeing that countries are turning towards rehabilitation instead of euthanasia, because they do realize that it's kind of a PR thing as well. You know, people are very concerned about the welfare of the animals, and also from a kind of conservation viewpoint, the impact of a really large-scale oil spill could be really big on a local population of seabirds, for example. So you need to really be able to kind of motivate why you've made certain decisions.
Thank you. Heta just has a comment that that this makes her think that you in WWF actually would need a similar structure as Eurova to coordinate voluntary oil spill response on international level as well. And maybe it's a topic that you should discuss in the next project together.
There's a lot of new topics to discuss for new projects.
Yes, and Kia also has her hand up, so Kia, go ahead.
Yes, just another comment. That was for the assessment tool you showed with the spider webs. I was wondering, like, what does a good basis mean? Like, is it covering a spill where you have 200 birds who's been affected or oiled, or is it for being able to take care of 2,000?
It's
so
a good question. Like yeah, thank you, Kia. And sorry for interrupting you there. I thought you were done, but you wanted to continue. It actually hasn't been defined as a number of animals per se. It's more about like the structures you have in place. Like, do you have, for example, a dedicated training program for volunteers? Do you have that in place? Do you have regular meetings between voluntary organizations and national authorities, for example? Do you take part in exercises together? Do you have an oil wildlife response plan that has been officially adopted? It's more kind of strategic level things like that, less so than just defining a certain amount of animals. Then when you come on a national level, you might have, like in Finland, for example, we've established certain kind of a tiered response system where we have determined how many animals we can deal with on a local level, on a national level, and when we need to have experts from abroad coming in and resources from abroad coming in to help us out.
So then, like, where on this like European or regional Baltic Sea level, is there something like specific you said that you would need to be able to cope with this amount or this many spills, or like, do you have any standards that you wish to be able to say, for instance, if a spill happens in Finland and we need extra help, we need to be able to get this help within a few days? Or is there any like, how much do we need to be prepared? I know there's the saying that preparedness is too much until it's too little, because it costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time, but it costs a whole lot of more money if you are not prepared when anything happens.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. And I think that this is also something that we do need to take into account in the regional discussions, because the fact is that we cannot all, train thousands of volunteers and have 20 or 50 vets ready to immediately be called upon when something happens. So we need to have that discussion on a national level, but also on a regional level. When is enough enough? And as I said before, with the self-assessment tool, we haven't really gone out and said everyone has to reach this level. It's more about, what level do you feel comfortable reaching? But having said that, on a regional level, it would be comfortable to have like a good basis to be secure that we can actually deal with it. For a national level, we of course aim as WWF Finland to have volunteers in the field within 24 hours of having been called. And that of course would then be directed at search and collection, making sure that the animals are taken in from the field and stabilized, and then that buys us a little bit of time to set up the permanent facilities and also call upon the European network if needed.
Thank you, Vanessa. And I think now we can move on to the final discussion. If anybody has any questions left for Vanessa, Agni or Sascha, and the final discussion will be led by Friis Petersen from the Danish Civil Protection League.
Yes, so if you have any questions, you can just write them in the chat or raise your hands. I will just give you a few seconds, or else I have a little bit of a list of taking notes during this. I have a few questions also. But I would love to hear anyone else, so it's not just me talking. I can see Hetta.
Yes, thank you. I represent Finnish Red Cross, and I was thinking about how hard work it is for the volunteers to take care of the old animals. And does any of you have experience of psychosocial support for the volunteers given by organizations like Red Cross, national societies, or some other organization or professionals? Do you have any experience with that? At the sites, I mean, during those cases, for Sascha especially, you presented many cases. So was there actually any psychosocial support for the volunteers available, or how was it?
Yes, it has been some support, but not on any oil spill. So it depends on the country and on the situation. And but this should be a must-have normally.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wants to comment on this?
I could just comment from our own perspective that this is something that we really raise when we organize trainings as well for our volunteers, to make sure that they understand that there can be this kind of psychological kind of effects of working with the animals, and that you need to be aware of that and also follow kind of what your co-workers are doing and how they're feeling, and be ready to talk about it with someone when you need to. So definitely that would be part of also the kind of healthcare system that we would provide then, for example, with the cooperation of the Finnish Red Cross in case of a spill.
I can maybe also add that yeah, there is. I haven't seen such ready-made psychological help plan for volunteers in many cases, and that's also, as Vanessa said, that all the volunteers that come are normally instructed that this can be huge pressure on your emotions sometimes, and that they are aware of that. And And one point, of course, is that I also presented in my presentation that volunteers do need to let the steam out after work and have some fun as well.
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, of course, I know it's a hard time if you're taking care of a lot of animals, but it's important to have some fun when it's appropriate and when there's time for it. Is there? I can see we have a question here from Eva Marie. We're talking a lot about saving the birds, but how prepared should we be to also rescue and rehabilitate other animals like turtles and seals? The rover has a section for turtles now, but should other animals be included in other risk matrices? I think that would be you, Vanessa, if you have comments.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that is always raised in our national training events as well, especially from a Finnish perspective. People are thinking about seals, for example, and that does require like a certain set of skills that needs to be trained quite well. So in spills in different parts of the world, turtles, for example, sea otters have been quite heavily affected as well, thinking about, for example, the Exxon Valdez spill. So yeah, there could potentially be, for example, seals in the Baltic Sea region that would need to be taken into care. Mostly those would be like young pups. The difference between the birds and the seals would be that the birds rely very heavily on their feathers, the insulating powers of their feathers to be able to stay warm and dry, whereas adult seals, for example, they have kind of an insulating blubber layer under their fur, so the fur as such isn't so important. But of course, seals can then ingest oil and also get skin lesions, skin burns from the oil. But catching a seal is extremely, let's say, difficult, unless the seal is in bad shape. It's a different story for the pups, maybe. But that is something we haven't quite yet ventured into. We'll see, maybe that'll come in Euro 3, you never know.
Germany has experience in treating seals, I guess, not the Sascha's organization, but his colleagues.
Yeah, that's right. But as Vanessa said, so most common is that birds are affected by the oil. So you also have seen in my presentation the photo of the dead dolphin. So dolphin and fish are also affected by oil. But yeah, you can say 98% birds.
Yes, so definitely something to look in, like in the future, so we can save as many animals as possible. I have a question for all of you. I don't know who wants to start. Just like, do you have one experience, one learning from working with this that you think that this is something everyone here needs to know to do it better in the future or ensure cooperation or anything? Do you have like that one thing you think this is the most important thing I can say within oil wildlife response? I don't know who wants to start. It's a bit of a difficult question, I know, but there's so many important things. But do you have that one thing?
It was an extremely difficult question, Kia.
Sorry.
Cooperation would be my mantra. Make sure that you have the necessary connections to all the organizations and authorities that are working, and make sure that you know each other. The better you know each other and the working methods of the others, the more successful you will be.
Yeah, I would add exercises and trainings are so important.
Yeah, you also get to train the cooperation in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not much left for me. Thank you.
Yeah. But those are really important things, I would say, in any response operation, whether it's oil wildlife or just oil spill, or if it's wildfires or what we experience in general in the Baltic Sea in these years. So we know how to cooperate and who to cooperate with. I think it's really great that we have things like ProBoard Germany and also the Eurova, so we get to know each other before anything happens, so we are able to do this cooperation and do it well. So, do we have more questions? Feel free to raise your hand or write in the chat. Sascha.
Yeah, so I have one thing. So I saw that some of our German colleagues jumped in at 6 o'clock Central European time, which is not the East European time. But yeah, my dear colleagues, I can give you my presentation on another day in German language. Maybe that makes sense in the end. Let's get in contact about this.
Yes, that's great. We will also share the presentations and the recording afterwards. It will be posted on ELF's YouTube channel, and we will send it out to all of you, just like to get the link. So if you had some of your colleagues or partners who couldn't be here today, they can always watch it later. So I don't know if we have more questions. There's no more coming up. So I think I will just say that's the end of mine. We will share a feedback link if you want to give us a little bit of feedback how this all went, what you think. If you learned anything, we will be very glad to hear that. I will put it in the chat, and then I will give the word to Kadri.
Yes, thank you, Kia. So Kia will post the link to the feedback form in the chat, so you can give your feedback if you want to. And it seems that all the questions are answered. So thank you again, Sascha, Agni, and Vanessa, for your fascinating presentations. And thank you, Kia, for leading the discussion. I would also like to thank the audience for participating in this webinar. And on behalf of all the organizers, I wish you all a pleasant evening and a good night.